everybody. Welcome along to Percussion Discussion, episode 97. Please check out our social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and of course, there is our world-famous YouTube channel where you can find all of our conversations, past and present. Please subscribe if you wouldn't mind. It only takes a second, and this way it ensures that you won't miss any of the forthcoming interviews. I wouldn't want that to happen. If you'd rather listen on the go, then this is no problem. All of our conversations are available in podcast form. These are free to download from your favorite podcast providers. If you can find a couple of seconds just to leave a short review, that would be really, really helpful. Helps get the word out there. Anyway, on to today's guest, a fantastic drummer, a fellow Welshman from 1974 up to 2010. Apart from a tiny little amount of time where there was somebody else involved on drums, he's been powering the Welsh heavy metal band Budgie, an incredible band and an incredible drummer as well. If you're unaware of Budgie, check them out. You can hear Budgie straight away. Burke Shelley had the most incredible and unique voice. Check them out. He's a wonderful guy and a wonderful drummer. You know that if Metallica, Soundgarden, and Iron Maiden are covering your songs, then they are good songs. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome the fantastic Mr. Steve Williams. Look, Steve, thanks so much for doing this, mate. It's very kind of you.
You're welcome.
It's great to see you. We've been back and forth a little bit, haven't we? But we've got there eventually. Now I've been busy. You know, you've had a few little health issues that you've had to sort out. But hopefully you're on the right track again to playing again.
Oh, I am. Yes. Yeah.
Good. Well, you actually mentioned that you've got your first thing in a while tomorrow. So that's good news. Playing wise.
Yeah, it's a local country and western band. Well, more like a country rock band, really.
Yeah.
Their drummer's got some family issues and he needs to take a break. So I'm going to get for him for probably up to Christmas, perhaps a bit later than that. But the reason I went for it was a guitarist just joined them called Di Shell from Sassafras. I don't know if you remember Sassafras.
I know the name, yeah.
So I've known Di all my life, really, and he's a great guitarist, and he's the one who recommended me. So I thought I'd pick up the sticks again, and the brushes, actually.
Superb. Excellent. It was good to hear, you know, because so many people, it just sort of fizzles out, if you like, and you don't, you know, it's great to see you still doing it and what have you. So that's fantastic.
I did quite a few years with a local covers band called Mr. Hate. Doing all kinds of covers, rock and classic rock and pop. But I got to the point where I got fed up of playing the local rugby clubs and pubs, and you got a room full of a hen party, and so I got tired of that, and I thought I needed a rest anyway physically, so I packed that in February. So this next thing will be first thing I've done for quite a while, so I'm looking forward to it now.
Yeah, I'll bet you are. Does it seem strange, you know, after a life and whole life almost, you know, with Budgie playing these original amazing songs, having to go and do covers? And as you say, you know, pubs and rugby clubs and things. Is it a hard thing to do that, or was it quite an easy transition?
I find it quite easy, to be honest. It's like I said with Budgie, it was a life on the road with touring internationally. We were recording, and you get used to that kind of lifestyle. So when it all stops and you find yourself just sucking your thumb doing nothing, getting into local cover bands was a breath of fresh air. The pressure was off. You know, it was quite fun. I enjoyed it.
And I suppose, you know, you're going to be sleeping in your own bed every night, don't you?
Yeah, at my age, that is a big plus. The traveling is not so, you know, I mean, we were on the road for months on end, and in the end, it really got to me, you know, and I was glad that we stopped. Unfortunately, we stopped through Burke's ill health, which was got a sad ending to the band, but you know, for me it was nice to take the time away from it, you know. Yeah,
sure, because you know it's an awful long time. I know the band had a few hiatuses, as it were. I think it was 87 to 90 something, wasn't it? There's had little breaks here and there, but it's always been a thing, hasn't it? You know, it's always been around and about, Budgie.
Oh yeah. Well, I actually left the band in 1986, I think it was.
Okay.
They got a guy called Jim Simpson in, used to be with UFO.
Oh, right. Okay.
They did a few gigs, and then Burke decided he didn't want to carry on, and he packed it in completely for a couple of years. But then, some years later, there was a lot of interest from promoters in Texas, because the band was quite well known in Texas in particular. And they were offered a lot of money to go and do a couple of festivals. And then it picked back up. So I got back with them in 1999 to do Sweden Rock Festival. And then we just carried on from there until 2010.
Fantastic.
So,
if you don't mind, let's go back to kind of where was your kind of first memories of music? I mean, forget drums for now. What's your kind of first memory of music itself?
I've got a good friend, a lifelong friend, and his name is Steve Jones. He's known as Pudding. And we went to school together, and we got into music together. And we used to sit in his front room as teenagers listening to the new albums that were coming out at the time. And it was Deep Purple in Rock was the first one.
Yeah.
A band called Trapeze. We had an album, Medusa, by those. And we'd sit and listen to them. Yeah, and he had a drum kit in his front room. And we'd knock about on it, and I was already playing in bands anyway. So that was my first sort of introduction to rock music, really. We used to go and see bands. We saw a band called Love Sculpture, a Welsh band with Dave Edmunds back in late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah.
And I went to see Budgie 2 or 3 years before I joined them. I went to see him in a local gig. And then as we sort of got older, we got into bands together. I went my way and I joined Budgie. And Pudding actually ended up as Phil Collins' personal assistant. He's still with him.
Oh, really? That's amazing.
Yeah. So, we both went into the rock business, and he went a lot further than me, actually, but behind the scenes, So
yeah.
That's how we both started together, and I enjoyed listening to music right from the beginning. That's
fantastic, that you both had, careers in the business, albeit slightly different, but still both very successful careers. That's incredible.
Whenever I see him now, I tease him about being my drum tech, back in those days.
So that was going to be one of the things I asked. Were you aware of, not aware, but were you a fan of Budgie during the early days, when those first 3 albums or what have you? Were you a fan of them?
Absolutely not. No, I didn't like any of the first 3 albums. I was a big fan of bands like Yes, that kind of stuff. I was in a band called Quest in Cardiff, one of the first professional bands I ever joined, and we were writing our own stuff, and we were very much influenced by by Yes in particular. So I was into a different genre of music altogether. And then when I was first asked to audition with Budgie, they gave me all the previous albums up to In for the Kill to learn, And I actually sat down and thought, this is very good, a bit raw, a bit rough around the edges, but really sort of they were belters, all the albums. There were some cracking songs on them.
Yeah.
So that's when I got into Budgie, when I was actually asked to audition with them.
So there was no second thoughts. You obviously, at the time, they were a very successful band even then, weren't they? Let's be honest.
Yeah, well, this is going back to 1974 when I joined.
Yeah.
And they offered me a weekly wage, which I'd never had with any band.
Okay.
So I said yes. And they were touring. We did first tour I did was in Britain, sort of smallish venues, but packing the places out, And we went over to Europe, and then it just escalated from there. And I went into the studio with them in early 75 when we recorded Bandolier. And that was my introduction to the success that Budgie sort of took from there on,
I mean, that album is, for my ears, is vastly different. It's kind of it's a more mature sounding album. I mean, the first side alone, Breaking All the House Rules is such a cool song anyway. And especially, I love the ending of it where it all just goes, it's quite progressive, isn't it? I think, such a great song. I mean, have you got good memories of recording that?
Oh, fantastic. It was my first time in a professional recording studio. We were up at Rockfield.
Yeah.
And Burke and Tony were the most patient and giving musicians. They'd already they had 4 albums under their belt.
Yeah.
So they were old hands at the studio game, Well, I was as green as grass. This was all new to me. So it took me a lot of getting used to. But they coached me along, and I was, when we came out of the studio and I actually sat down and listened to the album, I was really, even back then, I was really proud of it, and I still am to this day. It was the album that really sort of made me sit up and think, I can do this.
It's such a great album with such diverse songs. It's you can't really pigeonhole the Bandolier album, because the first 3 tracks alone are so far apart, aren't they, style-wise? I think.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a compliment, by the way. I mean, Slip Away it could be, I don't know, it could be anybody. You wouldn't necessarily say, oh, that's Budgie. You might recognize Burke's voice maybe, but the third track, is such a funky. It's pure funk, isn't it? Let's be honest.
It is, and I think Burke and Tony, both as writers and as players, always had those sort of feels inside them, but they could never. They told me while we were recording an album, I can remember conversations about. I'd done quite a lot of different styles as a drummer. I played in our local rugby club with an organist, and back the turns. So I learned how to play bossa novas, tangos, and stuff like that. Sure. And I never used them in my playing after that. But I can remember the conversation with Tony going back to Slip Away. And he wanted a different kind of rhythm, and I played him a bossa nova. And if you listen carefully to it, I'm not playing a bossa nova, but he is in the background. It's quite a sort of Latin American feel. And then when we piled stuff on top, I made it sound like a rock song, but it's a very gentle, a very sort of varied song. Like you said, it's not anything like anything that Budgie ever did.
No.
And I think the fact that I'd had a different upbringing musically to Ray Phillips or Pete Boot, who were out and out John Bonham influenced rock drummers, and which was great for those albums.
Yes.
So Burke and Tony both wanted to go further and experiment with their writing, and I think I enabled them to do that.
Yeah.
I don't think it turned out that well after that. We did another album after that. If I Were Britannia, I'd Waive the Rules, and I listened to that now, and I think maybe they went too far with experimenting. To me, it doesn't sound at all like the band should have been at that point. And I think I had a lot to play, a part to play in that, because I was a different type of drummer.
But, I think I like the first albums, but the first album, I hear just that polish and that, I don't know, a certain excitement is Bandolier for me. And again, as you say, probably, I'll say, not possibly, down to yourself. Totally different style. Just track 3. Who Do You Want for Your Love? If you've not, anybody listening, have a listen. I hear, and I think I've mentioned this to you before, I hear a lot of Simon Kirke in your playing. I really do, and I don't know. Was Simon ever an influence on you?
Oh, massive influence, yeah. Because when I first joined Budgie, obviously being a 3-piece, I would, for reference, I would listen to 3-piece bands, and Free were always one of my favorite.
Yeah.
Like I said, I have very varied tastes in music, so Free and Bad Company for me were the best, at that sort of that genre of music.
Yeah.
So yes, he was a big influence. I liked that sort of that non-playing in a way. He would do the minimum, and yet it worked so well, And I think I introduced some of that into some of the playing especially on that particular track.
Yeah. And there's always lots of space on the tracks, and I talk about this a lot. It's a thing I like. I don't like clutter in music for the sake of it, and there's none of that on the album. It's such a good. It's an album. I probably got that. I was introduced to that album probably in about 1980. I want to say 1986, believe it or not, by my ex-headmaster in my primary school. Can you believe? He took me to see my first gig, which was Judas Priest, and he gave me a load of vinyl, and one of them was that album, and so I remember even as I'd have been, I don't know, 12 or 13, so that's how long I've been listening to that album, so it's quite a while, so yeah. It's still there, still fresh in my mind, so hey, it's a cracker, and anybody who's listening or watching this, have a listen to it, because it's a hell of a debut, isn't it, for yourself?
It is, yeah. Like I said, I was very, very, very proud of it. I still listen to the tracks now, and it takes me right back to those days. And to me, the studio work was great because I felt so at home in the studio.
Yeah.
And it was my first experience there, but I felt comfortable, and it wasn't always like that. Later albums, that wasn't always the case, but on Bandolier in particular, I felt so at home, and that's why I got such fond memories of it.
Of course. And at the time, was the album well received? Can you remember?
It was, yeah, it was. There was a lot of people were surprised. And the first tour we did with it, British tour we did with it, we had all kinds of comments. I think a lot of people were confused because they'd already listened to everything up to In for the Kill. And as you say, this was a step up from that. It was more polished, it was more refined. The writing was a lot more sort of together. And people would come in and say, well, it's not the same, it's not, but I think people sort of grew to like it, everyone looks back now. People who talk to me about Budgie look back, even those who loved the first 3 albums, and they say, but Bandolier is my favorite, and I think everyone warmed to it. But we get people coming to the dressing room when I first joined the band, and someone would say, are you Ray Phillips? And I say, no, I'm not Ray Phillips. Are you Pete Boot? No, I'm not Pete Boot. I'm the new drummer. And one guy came up and asked me if I was Ray Boot. So, I mean, it was hard to sort of, first of all, to fit in with a band that already had established themselves and a style of music.
Of course.
But I think Bandolier did sort of get a lot more respect in later years, perhaps, But Napoleon Bonaparte is still attracted. Anyone who gets in touch with me personally says, what was it like to play Napoleon Bonaparte? It's hard to explain it, but it had a massive effect on a lot of people, that particular track, So like I said, the whole album is, to me, is worth the pride. We all felt proud of it.
Yeah. So if you had to choose a favorite album you'd played on, would that be it? Would you say?
Yes, it would. Yeah. Later, when John Thomas joined the band and we did the A&M albums, and there was tracks that I really enjoyed playing on the later albums, like I Turned to Stone was great to play on.
Great song. And I must say, as well as the musicianship, some incredible vocals from Burke. I mean, who took care of the backing vocals? Obviously, it's probably layers of Burke on the album, but live, would you have sung as well, Steve?
No, they wouldn't let me near a mic. But John used to do some backing vocals, but it was mostly on album. It was mostly Burke.
The vocals are stunning.
He had such a range to his voice, He's been many times he's been compared to Geddy Lee,
Get that.
Apart from looking like him, he also has a very high voice, or he did have in those days.
Of course. And
I had nothing but admiration for him. And he would be in the studio and we'd all finish the backing tracks, and Burke would spend days and days and days redoing vocals, and until they were just right. And 99 times out of 100 they were. And he had a cracking voice. So different,
Instantly recognizable. Yeah. Was it one? Did he have one of those voices that never ran out of steam? He'd never lose his voice, or he'd just keep going and going. Was he lucky like that?
In his younger years, it seemed like, and we tour and we do 40 gigs, back to back almost. And by the end of the tour, he'd be singing just as well as he did at the beginning. Obviously, as he got older, that changed.
Of course.
And the fact that he was a smoker meant that his vocals later on in life he did struggle a bit, but that's quite understandable, especially with age as well.
Of course, and a great bass player to boot as well. I mean, as a drummer always looks for a good bass player to lock in with, and he was fabulous. A great rhythm section, the two of you.
Oh, I loved his playing. We used to, when we started rehearsals for the tour, we'd do a couple of days, just me and him. Sit down and we'd work on accents and things, where we could catch a beat, in a particular way on the bass drum and the bass. So we'd figure things out before we actually sat down and rehearsed the songs as well, And it was well worth it because it was great on stage. The feel was great on stage.
Yeah. Well, I think you shared something on Facebook and about the recording of I Turn to Stone, and didn't you say there was a bit of a bit of a tantrum going on in there from yourself? Didn't you lose it a little bit?
Those were my tantrum days. Yeah, I was well known for them.
What things
I can't remember
going right?
It could have been something so maybe they made breakfast and left me out, and I walked into the kitchen and they were making breakfast and I wasn't invited, and I would get really upset. I was so childish; it was incredible. But they all knew me, and they knew that was going to, something would wind me up. But we couldn't get that last part, the actual galloping bit, the soul at the end of that song. I couldn't, for some reason, I couldn't get the feel right,
Yeah.
And we tried it a dozen times in a day, and then I walked away. I had my tantrum. A couple of hours later, they said, "Come on, we got to go back in and get this finished tonight." I walked in with an attitude. I sat down. I was recording in a separate room to the rest of them. They put me in the games room in Rockfield, which was about 20 feet away from where the studio was.
Wow. Okay.
But they wanted a big sound. And in the games room, it was all tiles, so we could get a bigger sound than the muffled sound in the studio.
Sure.
So I was in a different room. So I put my headphones on, I got on a kit, I played the track, and I thought, I didn't think anything of it. I just threw my sticks across the room and stormed out. And then he called me over a while later, and it was what's on the album. We actually got it right. And I think it was like that aggression in me was in that song, at the end. And I went coming and apologized to everybody.
It worked.
But it worked, whatever it took, it worked.
Oh, it's such a great song. It really is. So how old were you when you joined Budgie then, Steve?
1974. I've just come up to my 21st birthday.
See, you were like kids, weren't you? Really, at this point, you must have been living the dream.
They were all a bit older than me. I mean, Burke and Tony are 3 years older than me. So, like I said, they were quite mature in their approach because they'd already made 4 albums and they'd already done quite a bit of touring as well. So they were a bit further, ahead than I was. But I was 21, but I'd been playing since I was about 12 or 13. So I'd done quite a bit.
Sure.
But nothing professional like Budgie. So I was, still a bit wet kind of years, but
yeah. And I was doing a bit of research, and you were kind of like the darlings of Reading Festival in 80 and 82, weren't you? 80, you were further down the bill, I know, but I was looking at it's nice to look back at these lineups of these bands, and I think in 80 you were on with Whitesnake, Def Leppard, and Magnum, which that's a hell of a lineup when you look at that now. Yeah. And all of those bands are still going. Sadly, I know Budgie, you're no longer, obviously, but amazing to think that these bands are still going. Who'd have thought it then? Have you got any memories of that Reading Festival?
80 was, I think, I enjoyed 1980 the best. We did it 80, 81, and 82.
You did 81? I didn't realize you did 81.
Yeah. So, I mean, in 1980, the lineup, as you said, was brilliant. I think that was the year that Slade stood in for Ozzy, I think it was it?
That's right, yes. It was.
I mean, I so enjoyed Slade. I was a big fan of Slade anyway.
Yeah.
And they came on and they just stole the show. The sound was incredible. The playing was incredible. They had everyone, like 30,000 people singing Merry Christmas in the middle of August. But it was a great show. And it was, the whole weekend there was fantastic. And it was my first real introduction to big festivals,
Sure.
So 82, I was a bit disappointed. I don't think, to be really honest, I don't think we were ready for the headline, because most headline bands had huge light shows and they had the sort of cash behind them that we didn't have at that particular time. Okay. We were just about to finish sort of as a known band. 82 was probably the last, really the swan song for Budgie. After that, things started going downhill.
Yeah.
I think we got on there really because our manager, Adrian Hopkins, had quite a bit of influence. And he got us on headline. And I think we were the wrong band for the headline spot. And I've said that. I mean, no one else agrees with me. But I think we were a bit sort of, I don't know, we were like the poor boys of the headline thing. Everyone else, Iron Maiden come on and they had the massive light show and the big production. And I think we lacked all that. And I think Reading expects that. I did in those days, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, because I think Michael Schenker group were on as well, Y&T in their early days. So he's a great line. It's very honest of you to say that, though. That you weren't. I suppose the other guys were that thrilled to be the headline act at Reading. It was just a big thing, wasn't it?
It was, yeah, but John Thomas decided to have some special effects. He managed to get enough money together to have this quite large flying V. I don't know if you've ever seen any of the pictures from that. It's a massive flying V, and it was going to be lowered down from the top of the stage onto the stage, and it had something at the back that would push smoke out like a rocket. It's supposed to be in flames coming out, but it ended up like Spinal Tap. It wasn't as big as it should have been.
Oh no.
And when it came down, the wind was blowing, so it was rocking back and forth, and then it almost hit John in the head. It was like a real Spinal Tap moment. So I said we could have, musically we can do it. We could have got away with it, but we didn't have the big. Yeah, the big bucks to do the big show.
And it matters, that, doesn't it? It does matter.
Oh, it does.
Let's be honest.
It does. At that level, it does. We toured with Ozzy and we toured with Gillan, and we just used to get on and do an hour spot quite early on in the show. And it was just, we'd rock the place to pieces, and we'd warm the audience up. And it was always a full house. It was a good thing about those tours. It wasn't as if most of the people ended up in the bar. We'd play to a packed house, and Ozzy and Gillan both appreciated the fact that we could warm the crowd up. But that's the kind of, we were in our element there. We were just given an hour, a couple of lights, half the PA, and we stormed the place,
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask about, because you shared that you did the Blizzard of Oz tour with the UK support. And I was going to say, how was that? Because obviously Randy Rhoads been in that lineup?
Yes, he was. Yeah.
Yeah. How was that? Must have been it must have been fun as well as a great tour.
Oh, it was fantastic. I still got great memories of it, And Randy and our guitarist John became good friends. They wrote a few songs together as well, which I don't think ever surfaced. But yeah, it was a fantastic tour. Ozzy was great. I mean, everyone knows he's a bit of a maniac, but he's a nice guy. He's a truly nice guy,
Yeah.
And he treated us with such respect. Gillan wasn't that sort of friendly, if you know what I mean. He was more of he was a big star, and everyone was meant to know it, But Ozzy was so down to earth.
Yeah. Was Tommy Aldridge on drums with him at that point? With Ozzy?
No, it was Lee Kerslake.
Oh, of course, right? Yeah. This would have been after Uriah Heep, would it? I can't remember. I can't remember the timeline with Lee, but a great band though, all the same.
Oh yeah, I used to stay and watch them every night, and it was just great to see Ozzy, and he could perform in those days. He was great, it was a fun tour, and I learned a lot. I think we all learned a lot from it, and we got on great with the crew. And then again with Gillan, apart from Gillan himself, John McCoy was one of the boys. It was a friendly tour, everyone was sort of accepting of us, and treated us with respect, which was great.
I find it just hard to imagine what it's like going on tour with such, with somebody like Ozzy Ozbourne, who was not that long out of Sabbath at that point, really, so it was a whole new thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, but he was working to sort of build his name up, because obviously he was starting afresh, really.
Yeah.
So he didn't do huge gigs, they were, Hammersmith Odeon, Manchester Apollo, all the sort of regular big gigs, and he would sell the places out. But it was good to tour with him, because he did us the world of good as well, because obviously people got to know our name as well. A lot of people, that didn't know the band did after that tour.
Absolutely. And as you say, back then, I think people had a lot more respect for support as well, for support bands. These days, you go and see somebody and it's generally, there's a scattering of people when everyone else is out spending on T-shirts and what have you. But it wasn't like that back in the day, I don't think. People would come in and they've paid the money. Let's watch the show.
Yeah. And we'd go on quite early, so you'd expect the place not to be, that full, but it was. Every gig we did, it was packed from the word go.
Yeah.
And as you said, I think people used to think then we're going to go out for a good night, we're going to see you.
Yeah.
And sometimes, I can't remember the other bands, but sometimes there were three of us on the bill with Ozzy. So there'd be other bands to see as well, and everyone wanted to see them all.
Yeah.
I think it's these days, you go to see the headline act and you buy their T-shirts, like you said, and whatever. And there's no one seems interested in who's supporting, and they miss out on some great bands then.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree. Were Budgie a partying band back in the day as well?
Um, some of us would. Some of us. Burke and Tony were never party animals.
Really?
John Thomas was a real party animal. I used to go out with the crew, all the road crew, and at the end of the night, Burke was more of a sort of a loner, and he was religious back in those days. He had
really?
strong beliefs.
Oh,
so we'd finish a gig, and if there was a party and it was necessary for us to be there for PR reasons, he would turn up.
Yeah.
But if it was just us going out to get pissed, no, Burke wouldn't accompany that.
Oh, right, interesting.
So, but I'd go out with the crew.
Yeah.
And get into bits of trouble here and there, and but it was a good. I enjoyed the life. It was a good life. It was long and hard tours, and especially because we had families at home, it was good to get home.
Of course,
but it would make the time pass if you were having a good time. You're enjoying yourself.
Amazing. Now, there's one thing I'd like to touch on. I don't want to spend much time on it but I think it's kind of important. Obviously, Metallica covering two Budgie songs, which I know you didn't play on either of those, but that doesn't really matter because what I was going to say is, I know you weren't in the band at that point, and the band was on a break, and what have you. Did you notice any difference with like younger fans coming to see the band once Metallica had covered those two songs? Was there any difference in your crowd?
I don't think so. I know that there was a couple of instances where younger people would say, come up and say, how do you feel that you've influenced a band like Metallica? I would say the same thing. I wasn't on that track, but I can see why they chose Brett Fan in particular.
Yeah.
But a lot of youngsters would come up and say, what are you doing a Metallica song for?
Really?
Which used to annoy Burke no end.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah.
But I think Budgie fans were Budgie fans, and I don't think I think more Metallica fans would listen to the band after that, But I don't think it changed our fan base really.
It's interesting. I've often wondered, because it's a great compliment, isn't it? That
Oh yeah,
this huge band at the time. I remember I was in Germany with a school, buying Garage Days Revisited, and it was kind of like, oh yeah, this is amazing to listen to it. I'll be honest, Crash Course in Brain Surgery is a song I've never particularly liked very much, but Bread Fan, love it. It's funny, isn't it? I suppose everyone's different, but and I was looking. I remember hearing a Van Halen a bootleg, and I'm pretty certain that they'd covered In for the Kill at some point or other as well, which is, which quite cool. So.
Yeah, but I viewed it, they actually murdered it, but I think it was a bit of tongue in cheek,
Maybe so.
I don't think it was a serious attempt at doing a Budgie song.
Oh, really?
It was a jam on a night that they were doing a gig, and he made some comment about Budgie being a little bird in a cage, and so I think it was all tongue in cheek. But Iron Maiden did a B-side, a song off Bandolier called I Can't See My Feelings. And that's a B-side on a single by Iron Maiden as well.
Well, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Blimey. Oh, I'll have to listen. I'll have to check that out. It'll be on somewhere or other to listen to, I'm sure.
I can't remember what the single was, but it is the B-side of a single. And Soundgarden did a cover. I can't remember exactly the track, but it's a Soundgarden track. And it was a Budgie track. And it was one on one of their albums. Have you heard of that?
No, I didn't. No.
Yeah, if you check Soundgarden, they do I can't remember if it's homicidal, suicidal. I think that's what the track was.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was a track called Homicidal, Suicidal. So.
Brilliant. Oh, I'll have to. That's what I'll be doing once we finish talking. I'll go and have a listen. That's amazing. I always think it's a great compliment to the band when bands like these, look back and go, yeah, this is what we're going to do. Incredible. And one thing I'd like to talk about before we go is gear. It's hard to see from the pictures what gear. I've seen you on concert tom kit, like a white concert tom kit. I don't know what that was, and some Ludwig stuff. So what have you used over the years, Steve?
Well, I started using Ludwig. That was the first kit I ever had. It was a serious kit. It was a Heyman kit.
Nice.
And I liked that a lot, but that was in the early days. I went from that into Ludwig Super Classic. I quite a few of those kits. The white one you're on about with the concert toms was Pearl, and it was new to Britain, Pearl at the time. They were really struggling to get a foothold in Britain, and I was given that kit as a promotional kit. And when they asked me what I wanted, I was into concert toms at the time. And I asked for every size they had. So that's a big kit. It goes from about 8 to 16 in toms.
Yeah.
And the only thing they didn't have a big bass drum. They had a 22 inches, the biggest they did at the time.
Right.
So that was a Pearl kit, that one you've seen. And after that, then, what did I go to? I had a Gretsch kit. I was a bit of a sort of tart as far as drums were concerned. I was always looking for something different, and I would get bored with what I was using.
Yeah. So
I went through the whole spectrum, and at the moment I'm using a PDP kit.
Yes, nice drums.
By DW. It's like a budget range of DW. And it's got a 26-inch bass drum, which I love.
Right.
So that's what I've been using for the last couple of years.
Yeah.
So I've gone through quite a lot of different kits.
And have you been the same with cymbals as well, or have you just
always a pasty man? Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got a deal with them when we did Reading in '82. I met the guy, I forget his name now, the guy who owns the company, and they gave me a endorsement deal right there and then. So I've been with them ever since.
Really?
Yeah.
Amazing. And as far as snare drums go, because I'm always interested in. I mean, the snare drum is kind of the makeup of the drum kit for my money anyway. Do you use a certain snare drum, or are you just whatever comes along and try something new?
No, the difference there is that I've had a Pearl brass free floating snare, 14 by 6.5 inch. Yeah, I've had that for about 30 years, and I've never used anything else apart from that. And that's still with me now. I've got a few other snares, but that is my favorite. And I would never get rid of that. That's one of those things where I think the snare is like a guitar. You know, it's like you get so used to it.
It's like your signature almost.
Yeah.
Yeah. Incredible. I mean, it's funny because obviously some people will stick with their brand of drums through the whole career, and it sounds like you've gone through a lot of them. Do you still have any of those original early kits?
No, I sold them all because I actually gave up playing. I had again another medical problem back in the 90s. I had carpal tunnel in both my wrists.
Yeah, horrible.
And I was told after I had the surgery, I was told that it was probably because I was holding my sticks too tight. Mm-hmm. Which I probably did in those days, in the early days. So when I started playing again after having surgery, I went right back to square one, and I started to learn technique. I went into the molar and all the different sort of techniques that are available that we know about today. Mm-hmm. I had no idea about those unless you were a jazz player back in those days. You just did you didn't do traditional grip, you did match grip. Yeah. And so since the mid-90s, when I had surgery for carpal tunnel, I actually went right back to square one and started to. Now I play with a different style altogether, and my sticks are almost falling out of my hands. They're so loose, and I've learned to play like that, because of what happened with my other technique and how that sort of impacted my playing as well.
Sure.
So I had quite a long break, and I went back to the beginning. I actually sat down and learned my rudiments for the first time.
It's quite an undertaking, that, isn't it? Especially after all the big tours and the prestige gigs, to have to go back to basics and relearn is. I'll tell you what, take my hat off to you. That's it's some achievement.
I probably would never have done it unless it's like a lot of things, isn't it? You get to a point where you're forced into doing something. And you think to yourself after, why didn't I do this before?
Yeah,
absolutely. And I quite sort of enjoyed going back. I was sitting down thinking I might not be able to play again because I had this long gap. I couldn't hold my sticks. And go back to your earlier question, I sold everything because I thought my playing days are over. So I sold my Gretsch kit. I sold all my Ludwig kits. Everything went out the window. Yeah. And then I went back to square one. I got a practice pad. I started using bigger sticks to get the strength up and everything. And then I was offered the job back in Budgie to go back to Budgie in 1999. So I'm running around then trying to find a kit for the first time. And I got a Pearl kit. Again, another pearl kit, and that did me in good stead for a while.
Did the guys in the band notice a difference in your playing when you came back? Did they notice?
Burke did, because he'd known about my carpal tunnel.
Yeah.
And we sat down one night, I forget, after a gig talking, and he was on about his bass playing. And so his right hand in particular would get really cramped. And I said, go and see this guy. There's a surgeon that I saw and I became good friends with, because this hand surgeon is a big rock fan.
Right.
And he was aware of Budgie. I was lying in his surgery, having my wrists cut open. And I'm lying on this bed and you got to stay awake, So his crew, all his crew, it's a bit like watching an episode of MASH. And they had rock music on in the theatre. And they would come up saying, I saw you at Reading in 1982. And a guy would come up and say, I got all your albums. So they were all rock fans, So I became friends with this hand surgeon. And I said to Burke, go and see David. So he went to see him and he had carpal tunnel.
Really?
In his right hand. So they did surgery, got him better. And so we sat down one night after he'd had his surgery and he said, I can see what you did. You had to go back to square one to learn to play without damaging your wrists, And he had to do the same thing. So he became interested in like slap bass and doing stuff that he'd never done before, very funky stuff, So he knew he was on the same level as me then about going back and learning all over again.
Incredible. I mean, it's an incredible story, that. It really is quite unique, isn't it? That,
Yeah.
Fascinating.
But it shows how many years we were doing it wrong, even though we sort of played and we got away with it. It was for me, it was a technique I wish I'd learned when I was about 16,
You did a bit more than get away with it, didn't you? Let's be honest.
I think today there's such a different approach to drumming today. I mean, drummers are now virtuoso musicians, You've got people like Thomas Lang doing world tours on his own, and that was unheard of back in those days, and doing clinic tours. So there's a whole different world there now. And I think youngsters who start playing have got this whole gambit of information and they can use. So younger drummers today hopefully will learn the proper techniques and learn how to play, and they'll never have to go through that doing it wrong for so long, damaging yourself, and then have to start again.
Absolutely. Get it right first time and job's a good one. But through Budgie's entire career, it's a band, it's never lost its identity, has it, musically? Right through to the last album in 2006, it's still Budgie. You put it on and you can go, yeah, that's Budgie. Do you agree with that, Steve?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's unique in its own. The uniqueness maybe was one of the things that held us back from having a platinum album and making it to the real big time. Because I think a lot of fans who go out and listen to bands. I remember I read this thing the other day that apparently Angus Young said that he said he's sick of hearing people saying they made 25 albums that all sounded the same. He said, we actually made 26 who all sounded the same. And you know what you're going to get with AC/DC. Yeah. You know what you're going to get with Judas Priest. With Budgie, it was always a bit like, you never knew what was in the box until you opened it. And I liked that. I thought that was sort of fresh, every time. But at the same time, you knew it was Budgie, but it just had a different sort of approach, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was down to Burke. Burke was never the kind to stay still and just use what he had, and he had a very large toolbox and he used all the tools. And I think that's what made the band different. But like you said, recognizable as well. The 2006 Cuckoo Land album, I'll be honest with you, that's not a Budgie album. That's a Burke Shelley album. He was determined to put an album out of his own.
Okay.
So myself and Simon Lees, who played on it, we knew from the get-go that this was Burke's baby,
Yeah, yeah.
And I listened to it now, and I played a Roland TD-20 on it. First time I'd ever used
Did you really?
electronic in the studio. And it was in Burke's basement studio at his home.
Wow.
And we did the whole album, and I used the electronic cymbals. I went back and I said to Burke, those cymbals are awful. They sound terrible. So he said, well, come in and bring your cymbals in. And I redid all the cymbals, all the hi-hat, all the work that was on the cymbals. I redid it all. And we got rid of the electronic ones. So it took days to do it. But when I listen to it now, the cymbals sound great, but I'm still not really happy with the sound on this electronic kit.
But do you know, I would until you've told me that, I had no idea that. To me, I thought, yeah, it's just a good sound. It's a nicely mixed album, you know, and everything's there sonically good. I would never have guessed that they were electric drums. I really would.
Yeah, TD20.
Wow.
Which was a great kit, but it was brand new out of the box, and none of us had a clue out of. And I mean, these days, you'd be probably able to get better sounds on it. You know, this is nearly 20 years later. But if you listen to the album, Simon Lee's is an exceptional guitarist, and some of the stuff on there he plays, I love it. You know, I think it's great. And I like some of the songs as well. But it was a Burke Shelley album,
right? And
it was really telling the story of his life and his loves, you know, and his children. And there's a song on it called Captain.
Yes.
A lot of people have said, "Oh, why did he put that on it?" He put that on it for his kids. He wrote it for his kids, and he put it on the album for his kids.
And how nice! It's there forever. It's a legacy, and you know, he's sadly no longer around to say these things. So it's good on him, I say.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, Steve, this has been a pleasure. It really has, and I'm so glad you're picking up your sticks again. And I hope the rehearsal goes well tomorrow. Get out gigging again.
I'm just going to find a cowboy hat that fits me now.
It's been a real treat, honestly. Thanks so much for giving up your time. And I know everyone watching or listening, depending if listening on the podcast, is going to enjoy this. Budgie fans, hopefully, be some new Budgie fans from it. Who knows? Hopefully, yeah. Because there's a new album coming out. A new old album. We recorded an album in 2009 with Craig Goldie used to play with Dio. Yeah. And that was shelved. I think it was 8 concerts in Poland we recorded. Oh. So they've been dug up and they're now in the studio being mixed. So there'll be a live album coming out maybe early next year. And they've also discovered 3 unknown tracks that we completely forgot about, that Burke, myself, and Craig recorded in 2009. They've just surfaced as well. Super. So with a bit of work, there'll be some brand new material and a new album but it's, it'll be all the old stuff that we used to play before. This is a live album. It'll be something different, So that's amazing. So hopefully that'll be out early next year. Keeping the Budgie name alive. That's what we like. Superb. Look, Steve, thanks so much, mate. I appreciate you giving up your time, and I'm glad we got there eventually. Yeah, we did. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Matty. Thank you. You're very welcome, mate. I'll speak to you soon. Cheers, Steve. Care.